You are listening to the Big Blue Marble Podcast with Anwar Knight.
It's mid-morning, and for most, the warm sunshine is a welcome start to another beautiful day. For most. In this town, in this park, on this day, the police tape has been rolled out. It stretches from the trunk of a massive old oak tree and wrapped around a signpost and crudely tied off on the handle of a car. From this vantage point, it looks like a 1969 Camaro. Not that it matters, but it appears the vehicle stopped suddenly as its front tires are sitting in a knee-high mud puddle. Beyond that, a ditch and a gruesome discovery. The investigation is now officially underway. Police officers have secured the area. Special homicide detectives, along with forensics, are also on site. But before they arrived, another diligent crime solver responded to the scene. Blowflies. They are as common as your ordinary housefly, but this insect loves death. And although this crime scene is make-believe, the habits of the blowfly are scientific and based on fact. They have the ability to smell a cadaver from over 1 kilometer away and are typically among the first insects to arrive on the scene. Forensic entomologists rely on their grisly dining habits to reveal vital clues that can help catch a killer. But climate change is complicating their efforts. Responding to temperature extremes, they're being forced north, migrating to areas they've never been before. Different species are expanding, and it potentially could change the role these vital crime-solving bugs play in a court of law. We'll find out as we welcome Christine J. Picard. She's the director of the Forensic and Investigative Sciences program and associate professor of Purdue School of Science. I promise you this episode will fascinate you. Plus, we'll update the Blue Files and find out where the majority of plastic pollution in our oceans is coming from. This new study may shock you. And I'll answer your questions with the inbox. Ian from Calgary wanted to know how to talk to his kids about the climate crisis. It's a great question. It's all straight ahead. I'm Anwar Knight, and this is the Big Blue Marble Podcast.
Have a question, comment, or show idea? Let us know at bigbluemarble.earth.
Good day, Christine. It's great to have you with us.
Good morning.
You know, I'm so intrigued. Here we have yet another example on how we rely on nature to help us. And I should say, perhaps say it's not the most pleasant scenario because we're talking about death and cadavers, but blowflies, as it turns out, can play a crucial role when it comes to solving a crime. So that's where we'll begin. How does a blowfly help a forensic investigator at a crime scene?
Yeah, that's a great question to start off with. And really, it's all because of this specialized function that the blowflies have in the environment. I mean, they are nature's recyclers. They are part of the decomposition system. And because they are reliant on this resource, which is dead animals, which includes dead humans, and this resource happens to be quite nutritious in the environment, they have evolved a really sensitive sense of smell, which allows them to detect the smell of death very, very quickly. And so that the way that they work forensically is they act like a clock, and they can set the time for when the time of death had to have happened, because they will only go to animals, including humans, that have died. But they want to go there very, very quickly because they want to beat out the competition. And so they're used to determine what is called the postmortem interval, or depending on what method you use, it can be a minimum postmortem interval, which is the minimum amount of time since that body has been available for blowfly development. So it's the minimum amount of time that has gone by since that person was dead.
So when they go there, what is their objective here? Is it a food source? Like why are they drawn to a carcass?
They are there for the tissue. So a female blowfly will find the tissue, the animal or the human, and lay her eggs on it. The eggs will hatch, and then the larvae need that material, that tissue, in order to develop. They can't develop on decaying plant matter. They can't develop on feces. They need vertebrate animal tissue in order to complete their development and to start the cycle all over again. So the larval, also known as maggots, stages will eat or consume the tissue. They'll leave the body to pupate, and then they'll emerge as the fly, and the cycle starts all over again.
So it's that cycle that investigators would use in terms of timing, because it's a determined matter of time, right? From the moment the fly lands and then drops the eggs, becomes maggots, and then the rebirth, right? It's exact science in that regard?
Exact under really good, ideal lab conditions. But of course, insects are dependent on the outside, on temperature, right? Their development is regulated by differences in temperatures. They're what are called cold-blooded animals.
Okay.
And so, of course, the warmer it is outside, the faster everything happens. The cooler it is outside, the slower everything happens. And so there's a temperature component that plays into this, into these estimations. And of course, if it's an outdoor scene, temperatures fluctuate. Even just the presence of sun for a small period of time versus shade changes the temperature dramatically. And it's hard to model these types of things. So we do the best we can using lab-based reference data in order to try to make these estimations.
So all these variables, would this be sort of a standard rule book in terms of investigating a crime if it involves a body? They would look at all these parameters, whether it's winter or summer, how much the sun in terms of heat, and then put that all together and lay it out in determining a timeline of death. Would that be accurate?
Yes. Ideally, yes, that's what would happen. Ideally, a forensic entomologist would be at the crime scene and would be able to determine or look at some of these variables. So certainly local temperature is really, really important, but even things like how much ground cover there is really important. And that might not always be stated in reports. And truthfully, forensic entomologists don't get invited to scenes that often. They're usually brought in after the fact when it's being adjudicated. So when it's in court, because when it's in court, there's a defendant. And when there's a defendant, there tend to be timeline issues. When was this individual actually dead? Does the defendant have an alibi or not during that time period? So the time of death becomes really important at that point in time.
And the key here is that everything is photographed for reference, right? So if need be, a forensic entomologist could base their findings on those records.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, photography is a standard practice for all crime scenes.
And just for reference, especially for our listeners here in Canada, I was so intrigued about this. Blowflies were a crucial piece of evidence in overturning a very well-known case here. Some will recognize the name Stephen Truscott. He was sentenced, this goes back in 1959, for the rape and murder of a classmate. He was 14 years old at the time, and the case was based on the time of death, as you were mentioning, Christine. He ended up doing about 10 years and then was paroled, but an appeal was filed decades later to have the case reopened, and almost 50 years later, his conviction overturned, and a big part of that evidence was focusing, among other things, but on the blowflies, because they did have significant photography, a lot of pictures going on, and they measured, the maggots and all that sort of thing, and they deemed that this person that he was alleged to have killed died much later than previously thought. So it was overturned. So we can't underestimate this science.
Correct. I'm very much familiar with the Truscott case. And you're right. It was based on photographic evidence because the physical evidence was gone at that point in time. And so that's all you're going on is a photograph of some flies on a body and trying to make some determinations looking at that. It's very difficult.
And this is, of course, all under normal circumstances, but we are living in anything but the norm now when it comes to our changing planet. So climate change is starting to impact blowflies, and let's get into that. How are things different now?
Okay, so with any changing environment, any disturbance in your environment, organisms in the environment have three options. They can stay and adapt, they can move, or they can die. The blowflies are really active flyers, so they are likely moving with the changing climate. So, for example, if you have a a blowfly that is sort of adapted to cooler weather. As the temperatures warm and the climates change, then these blowflies will move further north so that they are going into areas that are more comfortable or that they're adapted to. And so we're seeing a lot of distributions changing in the U.S. So I'm currently situated in Indiana, which is in the middle of the U.S., in the middle of the country. And since I've been here, which has been since 2011, we've found 2 different species of blowflies that were only previously known to, occupy areas of the South. And so now here they are moving north. And prior to my coming here, there were another species that had been found in this area and so on. So species that have typically adapted further south where the winters aren't so harsh and they can survive those conditions are moving northward. And as species distributions change, you need to be aware of these things, right? So here in Indiana, there might be, 10 to 15 species that you would encounter in various forensic cases, for example. Once those species numbers start changing, increasing or changing, you need to be aware of that. You need to know that, hey, listen, this fly is here now, and this could be a part of the forensic, evidence that shows up in cases. And so that's the major way that I think climates are impacting at least forensic entomological investigations.
So these other species of blowflies, I guess they do not all have a same pattern then in terms of their process. Is that the issue?
They have similar patterns because they're all going to be using, the animal, the tissue for the same reasons. But the dynamics of the communities can change. So as an example of this, there are 2 species. I won't tell you the names because they're just long and complicated, but there are 2 species that are sort of at odds with each other in the sense that one of those species will consume the carrion or consume the tissue, but will also cannibalize the other species. So it'll eat the other maggots. And so
that could blow a whole case in reality.
Well, it could blow a whole case, but it also impacts how that the prey maggots, how they develop. And there have been studies that have been done that shown that they actually develop faster in the presence of that other species because they want to eat and get out of there before they're eaten, right? And so it's really, it impacts the dynamics of the whole system once you start bringing in additional species or you get these mixed maggot masses within a given animal tissue corpse or whatever. And so a new species can really change how the whole system has sort of been known to operate.
And there's no way of controlling that.
No. I mean,
it's nature, right?
Exactly.
They're just going to adapt, as you said.
Exactly, it's nature, and so with nature comes lots of variation, and it's important to understand that variation.
So this is really coming down to a new warming trend that we're experiencing, and that is the trigger for these insects. So this is adding to that long list of impacts of climate change. As we see our temperatures increase around the world, globally, but specifically here in North America, we're starting to see nature trying to evolve. And as you mentioned, there are 3 ways. They'll either adapt, they'll move, or they'll die. So when we talk about blowflies and in forensics and with police crimes, are these new discoveries known to police, or is this just starting to percolate?
I think it's starting to percolate. And known with police, typically the police wouldn't be analyzing this type of evidence. We, as academics, as people who do this type of research, our primary role is to do the research, to try to understand the system and to disseminate the information, because that's the more important part. Make sure other people know about this and so that they can use it. And we do things as an organization of people associated with forensic entomology to try to publicize this information to make sure that it's well known. And, and then talking to media is really good as well. This is a good way to get this information out there so that people can start asking some of these questions as well.
But I wonder, in 5 or 10 years from now, maybe sooner, is there going to be some real crack defense attorney who's going to say you can't rely on the blowfly? I mean, is this going to be a sort of an argument of defense?
It can always be an argument of defense, and it depends on what the basis of that is. There are going to be some aspects of the natural world that we will never understand, that will always provide, or that will always produce some variation, which in turn could lead to, error and that type of thing. But most forensic entomologists tend to err on the side of being much more conservative. So they tend to provide estimates that, it's an estimate. That's number one. Always the first thing to remember. It's always an estimate, but that are conservative, that try to encompass some of this variation.
But were you alarmed when the new species were discovered in different regions? Did that catch you off guard? Was that something that sort of made you stand back and go, okay, things are changing here?
I was surprised. I really was. I mean, I've been collecting blowflies wherever I live for 15 years, and I tend to expect to see the same things. And the first one that I saw, which I think was in 2012, and it's this fly. It's called Chrysomya megacephala, and that's because it has these giant eyes. And so it was really easy to see. Like, it just showed up as I was doing some collections, and I was like, holy cow, what's that doing here, which I've never seen in any of my collections. And so, when I sat down to start thinking about why would this have made it all the way up here, this is a little bit unusual, I started looking at temperature and weather patterns. And we had just experienced the hottest summer on record here in Indiana, and really in the Midwest here in the U.S. So really, it's not a surprise. And every year, it seems like we're breaking one record or another when it comes to the climate. So,
or every month.
Almost every month, exactly. So it's not. So I'm no longer surprised, I guess, with this happening, and I will continue monitoring, blowfly populations here to see how else things will change.
Do you foresee the day when, say, blowfly science will be considered no longer reliable, specifically in relation to climate change? Because unless, of course, globally everybody gets together and starts to make a real effort here to curb this, the warming trend is there. It's happening. It's in motion. Do you think that that's going to play a significant role when it comes to forensics, in particular for blowflies?
I do not. I really don't. It's important to make sure that we know what species are present. And that's the number one thing an entomologist does. When an entomologist gets an insect that's part of evidence, they identify the species. And they are very good at it. And I say they because that's not one of me. I do a lot of the basic research, but they're very good at it. And as long as you know what species it is, then you can go to the reference data and you can make your estimates. And then you can also attach some of the assumptions you make with your estimates. So I don't think, forensic entomology is going anywhere in the face of climate change. What I think is important is that, and more people are paying attention to this, is that you are aware of some of these changing patterns in order to make these assumptions that you're making when you're doing your interpretations.
So it's about adapting and cataloging, the new findings, right? So now you have maybe a new template to refer to, correct?
Yeah, just like the flies, we have to adapt as well.
And our blowflies, are they common right across North America? Would I see one in my backyard?
You bet you would. They are everywhere, everywhere but Antarctica. So they are worldwide. Okay. They're not in Antarctica. Where you would see them in your backyard, if you have a dog, you would definitely see them.
Guilty as charged.
Yes. They're the ones you probably see on your dog's droppings would be these metallic green flies.
Yes.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. You would see them on flowers. They're secondary pollinators, but they go to flowers because they require an energy source for flying. Flying is metabolically active, so they need the sugar, so they go to flowers. Certainly, if there's any roadkill, you will certainly see flies buzzing around it. So yeah, I'm sure everyone has seen a blowfly in their life.
So it's possible that a blowfly that lands on my potato salad at a picnic, in theory, could have been doing a dance on a corpse?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, that's unbelievable.
It is. Hopefully there's not that many corpses in your neighborhood. More likely it was doing a dance on your dog's feces.
Right.
But
It doesn't get much better.
yeah, I know.
Well, this has been fascinating. It is amazing when you consider literally the parade of insects that come out, for the most part, almost on cue in a specific order when you're talking about a carcass or a cadaver, that you get your blowflies, and then as I've been reading, there's flesh flies, hide beetles, pearlid moths. It goes on and on. They're so efficient, aren't they?
They are. Every single part has, somebody wants it.
Wow, this has been fantastic. Christine Picard, Director of Forensic and Investigative Science Program and Associate Professor at the Purdue School of Science. We thank you for your detailed insight into blowflies, the crime-solving bug.
You're welcome. It was nice talking to you.
Time to travel the world as we open up the Blue Files. The majority of plastic pollution that is destroying our oceans comes from merchant ships, according to a new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. For almost 35 years, researchers collected thousands of pieces of waste during visits to a small, inaccessible island located between Argentina and South Africa. It's in a zone where a vast whirlpool of currents has created what has come to be known as the Oceanic Garbage Patch. In the most recent collection in 2018, 3/4 of the garbage appeared to originate from Asia, mostly China. The report says many of the plastic bottles had been crushed with their tops screwed on tight, a routine process on board ships to save space. The study offers fresh evidence that the vast garbage patches floating in the middle of the oceans are not from single-use plastics dumped in waterways by people on land, rather a result of merchant marine vessels tossing their waste overboard by the ton. An international team of scientists have concluded that human activity churns out up to 100 times more planet-warming carbon each year as all the volcanoes on Earth. The decade-long study done by the Deep Carbon Observatory measured certain carbon isotopes and rock samples from around the world. It helped create a timeline stretching back 500 million years. They then used the data to map how carbon moved between land, sea, and air. The team estimated that the Chicxulub asteroid, which is widely believed responsible for killing off the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, released between 425 and 1,400 gigatons of CO2. Man-made emissions in 2018 alone topped 37 gigatons. The findings were published in the journal Elements. By the way, 1 gigaton is equivalent to around 3 million Boeing 747s. Let's hope we don't end up like the dinosaurs. And fast food giant Burger King in the UK will no longer give away plastic toys with children's meals, amid pressure to reduce plastic waste. The eco-friendly move comes after 2 children, Ella and Caitlin from Winchester in the southern coast of England, petitioned both Burger King and its rival McDonald's to stop giving away free plastic toys. These kids managed to get more than 1 million signatures. Burger King is now also encouraging customers to bring in old promotional plastic toys, which it says it plans to melt to make other items. McDonald's, however, won't budge, instead saying its customers would be able to choose between a toy and fruit. And that's this edition of the Blue Files. Time now to answer your questions and inquiries through the inbox. Ian from Calgary wrote in, wanted to know how to talk to his kids about the climate crisis. And that really is a great question. Kids may not fully understand it, but they are definitely starting to take it in. So I think as a parent, you need to gently guide them. And it's very important, especially with the access that kids have today to online material. We have to filter it and focus on the positive. And that's how we approach it in my home. I'm not a psychologist, but this is what seems to work for my family. We don't fixate on the doom and gloom because, hey, it's heavyweight even for an adult. So we need to shield them while inspiring them to get involved and help the earth. And I reinforce that we still have time to make a difference. Susan Clayton, a conservation psychologist, had this great article, and she talks about making it a visual for kids. And her example was, that our atmosphere is like a blanket and it keeps the earth warm, which is a good thing. But now that blanket is too thick because of gases that we've put in the air. So it's a great picture for kids to start to just understand the basics. And then, of course, you reinforce that with working together to reduce those gases. Let's get them involved. And I think that's the key here. You need to nurture the positive, and that the future can be bright if we all do our part. As parents, we need to demonstrate that, lead by example. So one thing we do with my kids, we say, what can we do to help reduce the carbon? Well, little things, just simply saying, look, if you're going to the refrigerator, think what you want before you open it. Don't leave the door open because that's energy that's being wasted. Let's plant a garden. We love to grow our own food. We do a vegetable garden, and it's an amazing activity. They get their hands dirty. What kids don't like to do that? And then they see their seeds grow to the point where they can pick their own carrots and peas for dinner. It's been a fabulous experience over the summertime. Planting trees, another interactive activity. What I'll do is I'll post a list on the show notes, so easy things that you can do to help reduce carbon, and to do it as a family. It'll be a positive experience, something tangible for the kids. So you can look that up on our website. In fact, that's the best way if you want to reach out here. Send in your questions, your comments, or show ideas to bigbluemarble.earth, or certainly via Twitter and Instagram at Anwar Knight. Anyway, that wraps up today's show. And I don't know about you, but I will never look at a fly the same way again. Yeah, just the sound of that right in the ear with the headset, man, makes me cringe. Please leave a review of this episode on iTunes, and of course subscribe so you never miss a show. I mean, you don't want to miss stuff like this, right? I would also greatly appreciate it if you would share this podcast so we can propel the change that needs to happen to save our planet. Thanks so much for your valuable time today. My name is Anwar Knight, wishing you a great day on the Big Blue Marble.
Hey, Dad, that was an awesome show.